I have a crush on Adam Rivers. At least, that's how it started. A harmless, fluttery feeling in my stomach whenever he walked into the coffee shop where I worked. I'd seen him for the first time about 6 months ago, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair perpetually messy in the way that made it seem like he'd just stepped out of bed. There was something magnetic about him. The way he carried himself with effortless confidence, the way he always smiled politely when he ordered his usual, a black coffee, no sugar, no cream. It's a boring order, but he made it look like a ritual, something sacred. It should have ended there, just a little crush, one of many fleeting infatuations that drift in and out of my mind like autumn leaves. But Adam wasn't like the others. Something about him stayed with me. I'd catch myself thinking about his voice, low and steady, when I was supposed to be focusing on work. I'd replay our interactions in my head as I lay in bed at night, wondering if he ever noticed how my hands shook slightly when I handed him his coffee. I began timing my breaks so I could linger near the counter when I knew he'd show up. At first, it was innocent enough. I'd note little things. The way he always carried a leather-bound notebook, the slight scar on his left hand that looked like it came from a childhood accident. But the more I learned about him, the more I needed to know. It became less about admiration and more about something else, something I couldn't quite name yet. One day, I worked up the nerve to ask him about the notebook. He looked at me with a surprised smile, his gray eyes locking with mine for a moment longer than necessary. "It's nothing special," he said, flipping it open to show me. Inside were pages and pages of sketches, trees, buildings, abstract patterns that seemed to swirl and twist like his thoughts had poured directly onto the paper. "It helps me think," he added, almost shyly. That was the first time I saw a crack in his confident facade, and it thrilled me. I wanted more. After that, I started researching him. I didn't think of it as stalking, not at first. It was just curiosity. I found his Instagram account, which was filled with photos of his sketches and cryptic captions. I discovered he was an architect, working for some prestigious firm downtown. I'd Google his name late at night, scrolling through images of buildings he'd helped design, imagining what it would be like to live in one of them, to live in his world. The obsession grew slowly, like a vine wrapping itself around my mind. I started taking the same bus he did in the mornings, even though it meant leaving my apartment an hour earlier than usual. I'd sit at the back, pretending to scroll through my phone while watching him out of the corner of my eye. He always sat by the window, his notebook balanced on his knee, sketching something that only existed in his head. I wondered if he ever thought about me the way I thought about him. I wondered if I could make him see me. One evening, I followed him. I told myself it was just to see where he lived, to piece together another part of his life. He got off the bus near an old brick building with ivy creeping up its walls. I watched from across the street as he unlocked the door and disappeared inside. My heart raced as I stood there, staring at the darkened windows, wondering which one belonged to him. I felt like I'd crossed a line, but the thrill of it was intoxicating. I couldn't stop now. The next day, I slipped a note into his coffee cup. "You're an amazing artist," it said. I didn't sign it. When he found it, he looked around the shop, a small, puzzled smile playing on his lips. I watched from behind the counter, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it. He didn't throw the note away. That felt like a victory. Soon, the notes became a regular thing. I'd write them on scraps of paper, each one a little bolder than the last. "Your sketches are beautiful. You have the kind of talent that changes the world. I think about you more than I should." He never mentioned them, but I could tell he'd read them. Sometimes he'd linger at the counter a moment longer, his gaze searching mine as if he was trying to figure me out. It was a game, and I was winning, but games can only go on for so long before someone changes the rules. One afternoon, he came in later than usual, his expression tense. I could tell something was bothering him. When I handed him his coffee, our fingers brushed, and he looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time. "Are you the one leaving the notes?" he asked, his voice quiet but firm. My mind went blank. I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off as a coincidence, but the words wouldn't come. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, he sighed and shook his head. "Look, I appreciate the compliments, but this, it needs to stop." I felt like I'd been slapped. He walked out without another word, leaving me standing there, my cheeks burning with humiliation. For the first time in months, I didn't follow him. I went home and sat in the dark, replaying the scene over and over in my head. How had I miscalculated so badly? I'd been so sure he'd felt something too, but obsession doesn't die that easily. If anything, his rejection only made it worse. I convinced myself that he was just scared, that he needed time to realize what we could be. I started writing longer notes, pouring my heart onto the pages. I mailed them to his apartment, careful to use a different post office each time. I knew it was risky, but I couldn't stop. He had to know how much he meant to me. One night, I stood outside his building again, clutching a sketch I'd drawn of him from memory. It wasn't perfect, but it captured the essence of him, his sharp jawline, the thoughtful crease in his brow. I wanted to leave it on his doorstep, but as I approached, the door swung open. Adam stood there, his expression a mixture of shock and anger. "What are you doing here?" he demanded. His voice was sharper than I'd ever heard it, cutting through me like a knife. I stammered something about the sketch, about how I just wanted him to see it. He took a step closer, and for the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. "This isn't okay," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You can't keep doing this." The word "this" hung in the air like a poison. I wanted to explain, to make him understand, that everything I'd done was out of love, but the look on his face stopped me. He didn't see love, he saw something else entirely. That night, I went home and stared at my reflection in the mirror, trying to reconcile the person I'd become with the person I used to be. The lines between love and obsession had blurred so completely that I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. But one thing was clear: Adam Rivers would never be mine, and yet, even as I told myself it was over, a small, stubborn part of me refused to let go. Because obsession doesn't die, it lingers, like a shadow, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to get more interesting stories.